algunos lo sabréis, otros no. Hemos empezado a colaborar con Made by, que es una organización, desde mi perspectiva, referente en Europa y a nivel global en temas de moda y sostenibilidad. Y bueno, pues queríamos hacer una presentación más técnica porque nos parece fundamental que ir subiendo el nivel, ¿no? Me decía por ahí antes Mónica de la Diputación de Guipúzcoa, ¿no? Me decía exactamente eso, ¿no? Lo de subir el nivel. Y bueno, pues creo que es importante y por eso hemos invitado a Ria Kearney, de consultora senior de Made by, para que nos hablara, ¿no? La pregunta era, si tuvieras que tener una cadena de suministro textil sostenible, ¿cuál sería el decálogo, ¿no? ¿Cuáles serían los puntos fundamentales para esta cadena, ¿no? Entonces, bueno, pues bienvenida, welcome, Ria. Esta presentación... Uy, ¿está bien? Vale. Esta presentación va a ser en inglés, pero voy a pedir a Alejandra que suba. Estamos haciendo como un proceso de transformación, nosotros también, porque pensamos que el mundo hoy estamos en un mundo global y el tema de los idiomas es fundamental. Entonces, otros años ya sabéis que hemos ido haciendo traducciones simultáneas. Este año pues vamos a hacer un pequeño resumen, ¿no?, en varios puntos para que... para que los que no hablan o no entienden todo, ¿no?, en inglés, que puedan tener, no se pierdan, pero como os decía, es un proceso, seguramente llegaremos a no tener ese resumen porque al final estamos en un mundo globalizado y nos parece que el tema de los idiomas es fundamental, así es que el que se tenga que poner las pilas con el inglés es el momento para venir el año que viene y entenderlo todo. Voy a ver, por favor, Claudia o Ainhoa, ¿podéis avisar a Ale? No sé, estás aquí, fenomenal. Muy bien, pues yo os dejo.
Everyone hear me? Okay, great. So as Emma mentioned, my name's Ria Kearney. I work with an organization called Made by. And I've been asked today to talk to you about 10 ideas that help to support a more sustainable supply chain. It's not too technical, so I hope the expectation isn't that it is a very technical presentation. And as you can hear, I'm speaking English. I did in fact study Spanish, and I used to live here a very long time ago. So I used to study actually very close by here. But my Spanish is, as we say, very rusty, so I'm not going to attempt this presentation in Spanish. So I hope you can understand my English with my Irish accent. So what I'll do though, I'll talk for about 20 minutes, and Alejandra here will then summarize into Spanish, and then she'll summarize again at the end, and then she's here to help with any questions as well that you might have. So just to give you a little bit of background into Made by, I'm not sure if everybody's heard about Made by, but we are a not-for-profit organisation that was founded in 2004 with the aim of making sustainable fashion common practice. And to do that, we work directly with brands and retailers across Europe and elsewhere, supporting them on environmental and social sustainability topics. And then we also work with other stakeholders in this sector on broader sector-wide programs as well. So just to give you a sense of some of the different brands that we work with, quite a variety of different brands and retailers across Europe and elsewhere, as I mentioned. And so I also mentioned we work with other stakeholders in different programs as well. And one of those programs is called ECAP, which is the European Clothing Action Plan. And I mention this because I actually work full-time on ECAP at the moment on behalf of Made by. So I'm very heavily involved in ECAP. And the purpose of the European Clothing Action Plan is to try to embed a circular approach into the fashion sector across Europe, ultimately trying to reduce the environmental impact of clothing being sold onto the European sector. And so we work with different partners at different stages of the supply chain, as you can see with the diagram. And as I say, I mention it just because I work full-time on it, and so I'll reference ECAP as we go through the presentation. So as I mentioned, I was asked to talk about a more sustainable supply chain. So as you can imagine, that is an absolutely massive topic in itself. We could be here all day talking about just maybe one sort of topic within that, so there's not a lot of time to go into a lot of depth or into a lot of detail, but hopefully it will give you an overview or a top-line sort of overview of different components that we consider when we think about a more sustainable supply chain. I'll talk through a few considerations. There's a few examples as well, and then we can make sure that the slides are then available, so those who want to go into some of these areas in a bit more detail, then you can do. So firstly, we think about design, specifically more sustainable design practices. So of course we know that from the studies that 80% of the industry's climate change and environmental impact arises from decisions that are actually made at the design stage. So it's an absolutely critical, I suppose, part of the overall process. It's the beginning of the product's life. So decisions made at this point really have an impact right throughout the supply chain. So here we're thinking about the raw material choices, we're thinking about the fiber mix or the blends, which have already been mentioned both by Pablo and by Alice. And then of course we're thinking about the associated inputs and the processes throughout the supply chain. And what we're seeing is increasingly different approaches to design, or I suppose approaches to design for sustainability that designers and other sort of brands and retailers are starting to explore. So for example, design for disassembly, so making sure a garment could be disassembled at the end of its life and the component parts could be used again. Design for durability, for example, so really thinking how that product could be used for as long as possible to be able to resist wear and tear, keeping it in life for as long as possible. And of course, as we've mentioned, the designer's role is absolutely critical. The designer doesn't work in isolation. For many designers that are independent but working within brands and retailers, they need to be empowered in order to make those decisions and enabled with the right tools and the right knowledge in order to move towards design for sustainability. So one of the platforms or one of the tools that is really aiming to do just that is the Design for Longevity platform, and this is being developed by DAFI, which is the Danish Fashion Institute. They are a partner with us in the ECAP program, and they are working on this platform at the moment. It's due to launch in September of 2017, and it's designed to be really a toolkit for designers and product developers, for buyers, for example, really enabling them with the information, the resources, and the tools that they need to support more sustainable design practices. It's free to use for the first year, and as I say, it will launch in September, and you can register now for updates on that. So a couple of examples from brands as well. So Nike, which needs no introduction, they're doing a lot of work to reduce waste and thinking about design to reduce or get to zero waste within their supply chain and products. So this is an example of their Flyknit sneakers, so that technology enabling them to reduce waste significantly compared with traditional footwear. And then another example from a US brand, this is the Reformation, and they do a huge amount in terms of sustainability right across their supply chain. But interestingly, from the design point of view, they design about 15% of their collection based on what's called dead stock. So they look at what fabrics and materials are available elsewhere within the industry, within the supply chain, and base their designs on that. So therefore reducing the need for virgin materials, enabling them. It's actually then quite an exclusive collection that they develop. So given it's only 15%. And so moving on, so number 2, more sustainable fibers. And so we know that the pressure for fibers and the need for fibers for textiles specifically is increasing year on year. And of course, that's only going to get more, I suppose, increase more and more as we see the global population increasing as well. And of course, with that pressure for fibers comes obviously the pressure on then the natural resources that are needed for those fibers. So thinking about water, oil, for example, land use, and the impacts that come with that as well. So impacts around climate change, pollution, water scarcity, for example. And so here we're really thinking about how we integrate more sustainable fibres into the product portfolio at scale. So thinking about, for example, more recycled fibres, which have been talked about already this morning. So reducing the need for virgin synthetics, for example, but also integrating more sustainable natural fibres into the collections as well. So of course the benefit being you're reducing environmental impact, but actually it helps to support more traceability and transparency as well, as many of the certifications and standards nowadays linked to preferred or sustainable fibres support then transparency within the supply chain as well. So just to give you a few examples, I suppose within the industry around sustainable fibres. So this is one of the tools that Made By has. I think maybe Hema mentioned it earlier. This is our environmental benchmark for fibres, and this is a tool designed for designers, for buyers, for product developers, to give them a quick sort of snapshot of how different fibres used within the industry compare when we look at them purely from an environmental point of view and purely from a production of fibre point of view up to the point of spinning. So you can see there how different fibres are classed from Class A to Class E. This is freely available from our website, and it's actually going through a review at the moment. So we're planning to publish an updated version later this year. And another example of work around supporting the industry of more sustainable fibres. This is the work that Made By is doing specifically through the ECAP program, and so we work directly with brands and retailers, supporting them to understand their current fibre footprint, so looking at exactly what fibres they use, the associated environmental impact, and then helping them with a strategy to integrate more sustainable fibres, so moving away from conventional fibres. So we're currently working with different brands on this, Bobo Shows, for example, a Spanish brand, OVS, Primark, Peak Performance, and continuing to sign up brands to this as well. So. Another example from an organisation, Textile Exchange, so they have a huge amount of information on their website about what they call preferred fibres. So a lot of information there, resources, snapshots, guidance, webinars, for example, which are really, really useful, and a lot of information then about the different standards and certifications that they own and manage relating to preferred fibres. And just to mention as well the investment that's going on within, I suppose, fibre innovations. So there's a lot of work being done around the more traditional fibres, cotton, for example, the synthetics as well, but increasingly more investment and investment in technologies around very, very niche fibres. So this is an example from Fashion for Good, which launched recently in Amsterdam, and they're working with different partners to support different entrepreneurs, different innovations to accelerate them to support the industry, and they include new fibre materials as well. And then the other example is H&M Foundation, the Global Change Awards, which has already been mentioned this morning as well. So doing a lot of work to support really niche fibres and trying to bring them out of the lab stage and to make them scalable and commercial for the industry. So then if we move on, number 3 is looking at production processes, specifically more sustainable production processes. And of course, we know that the negative impacts associated with the production of garments is significant. So some stats I think were already mentioned this morning. And of course, addressing those negative impacts is absolutely critical if we're going to move towards a more sustainable supply chain. So here we consider things like the inputs going into the production process, so chemicals, water and energy, for example, and how those can be reduced and minimized as far as possible. We're thinking about the outputs in terms of waste, so solid waste, but also effluent, how to reduce those as well, but also what's happening to them when we can't reduce any further, making sure they're not contaminating or polluting waterways, for example. And as we saw with fibres, a lot of work around new technologies and innovations in this space as well, trying to support the move towards cleaner production processes. And of course, changing legislation as well has a role to play. So where legislation in certain markets is getting stricter, so in China, for example, that's helping to move the industry towards cleaner production processes as well. And of course, the benefit is not only the reduced environmental impact, but also the cost savings and the production efficiencies that can be achieved as well through this as well. So there's a commercial benefit to this as well as environmental. I should just mention, there's some examples here I won't go into, but a lot of work already happening in this area, both at the brand and manufacturer level, but a lot of brands collaborating on this as well through different programs within the sector. And then just to give you an example, another tool from Made By, this is our wet processing benchmark, again freely available on the website, and this is designed to really help inform and raise awareness about different sort of common wet processing wet processes, and looking at them through the lens of sustainability. So looking at how they compare in terms of water use, energy, chemicals, for example, safety hazards as well. And another set of guidance that's available on the website as well. This is our guidance for wet processing standards. So this looks at 11 different standards within the industry that relate to wet processing and assesses them against 11 different parameters. It covers 4 different stages, looking at pre-treatment through dyeing, printing, for example. So the guidance is available, as I say, to access for those that are interested in looking at that in a bit more detail. So number 4, consumption and the need to move towards more sustainable consumption to support a more sustainable supply chain. So we know that the consumption rates show no sign of slowing down at all. When we think about growing population as well, we can see how consumption is just growing at an ever increasing rate. And then to add to that, we are not only consuming more, but we're also throwing away more as well. So they estimate that within Europe, we're throwing away 5.8 million tons of textiles every single year. So here we're considering, for example, how we engage with consumers and society generally in terms of making consumption more sustainable. And of course, it raises the question of then the role of the brands and the retailers to directly engage with their own customer base in terms of their habits. So it's about how we can influence consumers, generally speaking, around their buying habits, so what they're purchasing, how often they're purchasing, but also what they're doing with the garments when they have the garments at home. So how are they using them, washing them, caring for them, and what do they do with them at the end of life as well? So how do they dispose of them? So some examples here. This is an example of a behaviour change campaign called Love Your Clothes. This has been developed by a UK-based organisation called WRAP. They're also a partner within ECAP as well. So this is a website that contains a huge suite of different resources that support, well, I suppose, individuals and sort of educating the individual, but also can be used by brands and retailers and other organisations within the industry to help inform their messaging in terms of influencing behaviour change. So a lot of resources there that are available to use. This is now actually being adapted through the ECAP program, so they're adapting the content and the messages to make it relevant to the European market, and then that will be rolled out across Europe as well. So currently looking for different organisations that can support with the dissemination of this across Europe. And a couple of examples then from brands. So not a lot of brands have moved into this space at all at the moment. A few have, so the likes of Patagonia were taking very bold statements. For example, don't buy this jacket as part of their Black Friday advertising. So sort of actively discouraging their consumers to keep on buying new products and trying to keep the ones that they have in use for much longer. Another example from Patagonia where they're trying to directly engage consumers in terms of their washing habits. So this is work that they're doing specifically related to the topic of microfibers. So Patagonia is heavily involved in research and development around the issue of microfibers and microfiber pollution, given the garments that they use and produce. So encouraging consumers to actually wash their synthetic fibers in this filter bag, which they call the Guppy Friend. So making them available to their consumers. And then another example here, this is from Selfridges, which is a very high-end, well-established department store in the UK, you may have heard of, and they launched a program called Material World, and this is trying to engage their customers around the material impact of the clothing that they're buying. So they've done a lot of work with young up-and-coming designers who are integrating sustainability into their collections, showcasing them in their windows, which are world famous, looking at on-product labeling as well, and then also making a lot of information available online as well to try to engage their customers. And then if we go on to step number 5, this is looking at more collection in order to make the supply chain more sustainable overall. So as we saw the rates of, let's say, disposal of garments, which is quite extortionate. And then to add to that, or to make that even more depressing, the stats show that 75% of that is actually ending up in landfill or incineration, so only 25% is actually being recycled, so it's a huge amount of waste. What makes that even more depressing is the fact that 95% of the discarded clothing could in fact be recycled or upcycled. So there's a huge disconnect and a huge gap there between what's actually being collected and what could be collected. So a huge opportunity as well for the industry. And so when we look at, I suppose, aspects within this area, it's really about increasing consumer awareness, so they're aware of, sort of links back to that in terms of engaging the consumer so they know what to actually do with their garments when they no longer want them. And it's really trying to find solutions for effective collection systems. So it's sort of changing business models, looking at how we can collect more, both at the brand and retailer level, but also municipalities, so local municipalities and the role that they play in this. And also then improved sorting technologies as well. So it's one thing to collect more garments, but we actually need to then be able to sort them effectively as well once we have them. And of course there's I suppose a benefit around reduced environmental impact, but of course it's really about trying to recover that value from that discarded textile, not letting it go to waste, but making sure that we can make use of it. So a couple of examples here, ICO, which you may well know, so ICO, which stands for I Collect, so they're working with a huge number of different brands and retailers on their in-store returns scheme, so you'll see the boxes in store. So they are collecting, but they're also sorting, and they recognise the need to, I suppose, to really evolve this process and make it more sophisticated if we're going to actually really try to tackle the issue. So they're currently manually sorting in their I suppose, facility in Germany, but they recognise the need to move beyond manual sorting. And then another example, this is more looking, I suppose, at packaging specifically, and this is an example called Repack. They're actually one of the Innovation Award winners that we saw through Fashion for Good, and they have developed this very durable packaging whereby when it's the brands that are sending their garments out, in this packaging, consumers then can send that back free of charge, and it's designed to be used up to 20 times, at least 20 times, if not more. And then the consumer is incentivized. So if they're sending it back, they get a voucher, which gives them a discount off the next product that they buy from that brand. So again, just thinking about I suppose, the packaging solutions that also are needed within a more sustainable supply chain. Okay, I think I'm going to stop. Am I? And I'm going to just let Alejandro try to somehow summarize all of that in less than 5 minutes.
Hola, yo solo voy a hacer un pequeño resumen, no voy a hacer una traducción de todo lo que ha dicho, que es mucho. Bueno, 10 ideas para una cadena de suministro textil sostenible, por Ria Kearney. Made by es una organización sin ánimo de lucro que surge en el año 2004 con el objetivo de promover la moda sostenible. Su lema es moda con respeto por las personas y el planeta. Se aproximan de forma holística al tema de la sostenibilidad y proponen 10 puntos clave para mejorar todas las fases de la cadena de suministro textil. Las 10 ideas que proponen son las siguientes. 1. Prácticas de diseño más sostenibles. Los estudios demuestran que el 80% del impacto climático y medioambiental de la industria dependen de las decisiones tomadas en la fase de diseño. El rol del diseñador está evolucionando. Cada vez tienen que tener más en cuenta aspectos que antes no se les prestaba atención, como el empleo de materias primas sostenibles, diseños de larga duración o las posibilidades de reciclaje de las prendas. 2. Fibras más sostenibles. Por un lado, se trata de utilizar fibras que sean potencialmente reciclables para disminuir el impacto medioambiental. También se comienza a utilizar tejidos innovadores, como por ejemplo el fabricado a partir de setas como sustituto del cuero. 3. Un sistema de producción más sostenible. La industria de la moda es la segunda más contaminante a nivel mundial. Emplea toneladas de agua, productos químicos y energía, y producen muchísimos desechos. Son necesarios tanto cambios en la legislación como el desarrollo de nuevas tecnologías, con el fin de reducir el impacto medioambiental. 4. Un consumo más sostenible. El año pasado se fabricaron 14 prendas por cada habitante del planeta. La decisión de los consumidores acerca de dónde comprar puede llegar a generar nuevos modelos de empresa en los que prime la transparencia y la responsabilidad medioambiental. 5 y 6. Más recolección de prendas usadas, así como mayor reutilización y reciclaje de los textiles recuperados. El año pasado, solo en Europa, se tiraron 5,8 millones de toneladas de ropa, de las cuales solo un 25% fue reciclado. Lo triste es que el 95% de las prendas desechadas podrían haber sido recicladas. Con mejores sistemas de recolección y un incremento en la tecnología de separación, podríamos reducir el impacto medioambiental en gran medida al no generar tanto desperdicio. Ya está.
Okay. Very concise. Okay, so point number 6 is around reuse and recycling. And of course, if we're collecting more, then we should be reusing and recycling more. So this is really like the critical component. And it's really about understanding what are the business models and the systems that we need in order to be able to reuse and recycle more of those textiles that are collected. So it's thinking about kind of those optimal fiber blends, so thinking back to the design stage, making sure that the products that we're designing are not hindering the reuse and recycling process, but they're actually facilitating the reuse and recycling process. And it's also thinking about the role of technology and innovations within recycling, which we've looked at already this morning. So there are some examples like Recover, which is excellent, whereby that recycling is able to be used at scale, it's commercial, and the big brands and retailers are able to integrate that into their supply chain. And it's now about really trying to find other solutions where those technologies and innovations at the lab stage are coming out of the lab, they're being piloted successfully, and then moving towards commerciality and to be scaled. So really this is about where we start to, I suppose, think about not only avoiding the use of virgin materials, but actually moving towards a more circular system. This is really the kind of the tipping point or the connecting point. So just to give a few examples, there are various brands that are starting to think about how they adapt their business models and offer different products and different services that help them to, I suppose, address this issue of reuse and recycling. So some really interesting examples out there currently of what brands are doing. This is from Nudie Jeans, and they offer free repairs within their stores, but they also offer free repair kits to customers who actually want to do the repairs themselves at home. For those items that are coming back and the customer no longer wants it, they're actually then repairing them themselves and then selling that as second hand within their store. And then garments that are coming back that can't be reused as a garment, as say denim jeans, they're actually then repurposing them into other products, for example, for sale through their Denim Maniacs program. So for example, rugs and kind of cushion covers and things like that. So very holistic approach to this sort of this model around reuse and recycling. Another example, this is Patagonia again, but they launched a collection called the Recollection, and their aim was to launch this collection using as many recycled materials and components as possible. And they did that using the sort of their heritage styles, so they looked back in their archives, so really tried to look at classic styles, so classic styles that remain sort of in fashion or kind of in demand for a long period of time, and then updating them with these recycled materials and components. And another example from a US brand, this is Fisher Found by Eileen Fisher. And really interesting that they had a take back scheme in place, and for a long time were collecting garments from customers but didn't actually know what to do with them. So they ran a competition, they brought design graduates in to the business, and they spent months trying to figure out exactly what to do with the garments, and the result was the Fisher Found collection. And so they are now offering I suppose 3 forms or 3 lines under that collection. So they've got Reworn, where it's simply been professionally cleaned and then is ready for resale. They've Renewed, where it's been mended or it's been over-dyed with natural ingredients and then ready for resale. Or Remade, where it's been kind of completely remade with sorts of unique design, all being then resold within their stores. So again, really interesting to see how their product and their service offer is evolving in that reuse and recycling space. And then if we move on to collaboration and alignment, and this I suppose is really a theme that it's a topic in itself, but it's really cross-cutting right across the supply chain when we think of a more sustainable supply chain. And of course, there's a lot already happening in this space. There is a lot of collaboration already underway. We see that in many different forms. So strategic partnerships maybe between a brand and an expert NGO, or multi-stakeholder initiatives coming together to tackle certain topics or certain issues. The reason I add alignment here, I think, is because there's obviously the danger that sort of the industry keeps on collaborating endlessly, but never quite aligning on kind of the collaboration. So lots of different initiatives happening, maybe slightly in isolation or in silos. So that need to collaborate, but also to align on what they're collaborating on as well, is absolutely key. And of course, the benefit here, as I mentioned, aligning on the key issues and the industry targets, being able to develop common standards and goals for the industry. and then being able to collectively work towards progress. So being able to make progress at a much quicker pace than if brands, retailers and other stakeholders are working by themselves. So just to give you a couple of examples, this is a global fashion agenda, which many of you may have heard because it happened just a couple of weeks ago in Copenhagen. This came out of the Copenhagen Fashion Summit, and they are calling on brands and retailers to commit and work together on transitioning to a circular fashion system. So they're also focusing on aspects that I've just mentioned, so design, collection, reuse and recycling as well. So they already have over 30 brands that have signed up to work together on this. A lot of really interesting information available online, and Alice mentioned the Pulse report as well that was published as part of this work. And another example, this is Canopy, and this is a commitment, really a campaign, I suppose, that it was launched 3.5 years ago by a Canadian NGO called Canopy. And this is focused on trying to engage brands and retailers in the sector on moving away from sourcing of wood pulp from endangered forests. And they have had a huge success in terms of bringing brands and retailers and other stakeholders together. So over 100 now working together on this very specific topic. So working on policies that support this. They're working together on mapping the viscose or the cellulosic supply chain, and then working together to find solutions. So finding solutions for cellulosic derived fibers, but away from wood that may be coming from these endangered forests. And then if we move on, so step number 8 is around transparency and the need for greater transparency within the industry if we're going to support a more sustainable supply chain. And of course, I suppose the industry has become much more transparent in recent years, so the landscape is changing a lot already. There's a huge amount of pressure for the industry to become more transparent from consumers, but also from NGOs and from governments as well. And of course, the fashion supply chain is notoriously difficult, I suppose, to gain transparency within. So both for brands themselves to really understand their own supply chain is notoriously difficult. But also for a consumer trying to gain transparency maybe of the supply chain of a particular brand that they're buying from or want to buy from. Again, it's notoriously difficult. So here we're really considering, I suppose, the role of that stakeholder pressure. So we are seeing how that is having an influence and it is changing the transparency of the sector. And of course, that transparency, I suppose, comes in different forms. So we're starting to see brands and retailers disclosing where they're sourcing from, so disclosing lists or maps of their suppliers, for example. We're seeing a lot more effort trying to map the supply chain and really trying to map it beyond tier 1, so really trying to get right through the various tiers of the supply chain to the origin of the raw material. So a lot of work being done in that space as well. I mentioned certifications as well earlier, so the role of certifications where they're supported by chain of custody systems, which are helping again the industry to gain transparency of the supply chain. Again, seeing the role then of digital platforms. So as sort of the digital technology becomes more sophisticated, there's a role there for digital technology to help in the mapping and the mapping of supply chains and making them more transparent as well. And of course, the benefits of this is understanding where your raw materials are actually coming from, really gaining transparency on the risks within the supply chain so that you can actually do something about them, and therefore strengthening the supply chain and also then strengthening that engagement that you have with your different stakeholders. So just to give you some examples, this is an example from G-Star. So they are one of many different brands at the moment starting to disclose their suppliers. So they've launched it, or I suppose, shared it as an interactive map. H&M also disclosing, Adidas, for example, Levi's. So some disclosing everything, some not yet disclosing everything, but at least disclosing part or a proportion of their supply chain. And then just some other examples of traceability, and again, thinking of technology and the role of that in terms of traceability and transparency. So the first example of Remo, they do a lot of work around recycled fibers and connecting, I suppose, supporting brands to source recycled fibers and help them build the supply chains they need. But they also extend that into labeling, and specifically on product labeling, whereby the consumer can use the QR code to find more about the garment, where it's come from, and it also then tells them how much has been saved from an environmental point of view because they're using recycled fibers as opposed to virgin fibers. And then another example from an organization called Povigi, which again, using digital technology and QR codes so that consumers can scan a product and find out more about where that product has actually come from. So really interesting things happening in this space as well. So then moving on, step number 9 is around measurement and reporting. And I suppose as we gain more transparency within the supply chain and we have more information, then we're better able to measure what's going on within the supply chain and then better able to report on that as well. And of course, I suppose there are various tools and various means for measuring and for reporting. And of course, it can come from the brand directly, but there's a huge role here, as we've seen, from kind of other stakeholders within the industry, so NGOs and other organizations that are releasing benchmarks and research reports and investigation into the industry, which are all helping to move the industry forward, both in terms of transparency, but also in terms of measurements and reporting. So they're all very interlinked, interconnected. And again, when we think about the transparency aspect, it's really also connected to holding different stakeholders to account. So whereby brands may be measuring where they're starting from, reporting on that to their consumers, and then our consumers can then hold them to account, checking how they're improving year on year against what they said that they would do, for example. So just to give you an example of one of the tools, this is Mode Tracker, which is one of the tools that Made By has developed and uses with different brands. This is really a performance tracking tool, so it enables brands to measure their performance against an industry, I suppose an industry best practice roadmap. And this is verified, and then they're able to disclose those results online in very visual scorecards. So it's very visual, kind of very top-line information for, let's say, certain consumers that want to know a little bit, but a lot more than detailed information for those that want to dive into much more detail, and enabling them then to report year on year and see how their progress is improving. And this is an example from Caring. So this is their environmental profit and loss. So this is a really interesting, I suppose, methodology, which is a much more holistic form of sustainability reporting, whereby they're taking into account the cost and the benefit to the environment of their business operations. And so their entire group of brands now has their own environmental profit and loss. And the results of this, and as well the methodology, is all available on the Caring website. So really interesting to see what they've done here to try to measure and account for the impact of their business, and then obviously improve on that as well. And this is another example from Textile Exchange. So they do a lot of work to really measure and report on where the industry is in relation specifically to fibres, and as they call it, preferred fibres. So they annually will publish what's called the Preferred Fibres Benchmark, and it looks at how the sector is performing generally in terms of the uptake of more preferred fibres, but it also then looks at what brands are doing as well, specifically. So it will rank different brands, as you can see here, in terms of the top users of recycled polyester, lyocell, for example, and recycled down as well, or certified down. So interesting, of course, for the brands themselves to see how they perform against other brands and their peers within the industry, but then interesting for other stakeholders as well to see how this sector is moving forward within this area of preferred fibres specifically. And then last but not least is social sustainability. So of course, none of what I've discussed is, I suppose, possible without people. So everything is dependent on people at every single stage of the supply chain. And so thinking about the social sustainability and how those social standards are within the industry is an absolutely critical point as well. So we know, of course, the fashion industry has a huge social footprint. And so the opportunity for making improvements in terms of social and labour standards is really significant. There are a huge number of topics, I suppose, being looked at the moment. So a huge number of issues that are being looked at, debated, discussed, reported on, measured against within the industry. And of course, we don't have time to go into all of those today. But a huge number of issues and topics, but also a huge amount being done, both at the brand and retailer level, but also with different stakeholders are really trying to move the industry forward in terms of its, let's say, its social performance as well. So if I try to sum all of that up, when we look at those 10 steps that will help to move the industry towards a more sustainable supply chain, really what we're trying to get to is a more circular supply chain. And of course, there's a lot of discussion about this at the moment. So I suppose circularity really is sort of the buzzword at the moment within the sector. And really with the intention being of moving the industry from a linear model, so the take, make, waste, which could be as sustainable as it could get to, but it's never going to be fundamentally sustainable if we can't actually then close the loop and create a circular system. So one that is reducing environmental impact, producing no waste. So it's we're trying to design waste out of the system and then create a system whereby all of those products can be reused and recycled in a restorative model. So as I say, a lot of work happening at this moment around the circularity of the system and how we can get there. So just to give you a couple of examples, this is a diagram from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and I mention them simply because they're very, very influential. I suppose you could call them a think tank, but very influential around the circular economy and approaches that can be taken across different sectors, but also now starting to become involved within the textile sector and within fashion specifically. So they just 2 weeks ago at the Global Fashion Agenda launched the Circular Fibres Initiative. So it'd be interesting to see what comes out of that as they start to look at textile flows across the industry and how we can move the industry to a more circular system. Again, a lot of resources available on their website. And another example here, this is the Cradle to Cradle Products Innovation Institute. So a US organization, but also with headquarters in Europe. Again, doing a lot of work on circularity, a lot of work with products within different sectors, but also then starting to get involved within the fashion sector specifically. So they run a program called Fashion Positive and have another sort of arm of that called Fashion Positive Plus, trying to bring different brands and retailers and manufacturers together. And they're specifically looking at how to find solutions to what they call the building blocks of what will be a circular fashion system. So specifically looking at the yarns, different fibers, the dyes, the components. So those component parts that designers, for example, and brands and retailers need in order to move to a circular system. So again, a huge amount of information available on their website. So I realize that that's a really, really quick run through what is an absolutely massive topic, and each of those topics are very big topics in their own right. We could spend the afternoon just looking at one of them, for example. So it's quite overwhelming, I suppose, when we try to think about all of this in a short space of time. I suppose as we work with different brands and retailers in the work that we do, and we think about, I suppose, how overwhelming it can be and how to get them started, we then think about this guidance as well. So just really to share some of these ideas with you. So I think it's very clear that the importance of taking a holistic approach is really looking at every single part of the supply chain, not looking at any one part in isolation. It's asking questions. So it's asking questions and asking more questions, really trying to get a sense where you're starting from, what your baseline is. Really trying to gain as much insight and knowledge as possible into the supply chain so that you can then prioritize where you're going to really start taking action. So really understanding where the risks are, but where the greatest opportunities for impact are as well. I think it's critical as well that we are recognizing the interconnectedness. So you can see there how so many of those different topics actually connect to another topic. Nothing there is in isolation. They're all interrelated. It's also then recognizing the trade-offs. So none of the decisions really within the, I suppose, within sustainability, or as we move towards a more sustainable supply chain, they're not black and white and they're not straightforward, and there will be trade-offs as we try to make different decisions around sustainability. And then really it's just making a start. It's just making a start somewhere, continuing to ask questions. It's finding partners to collaborate with. So rather than thinking you have to do it by yourself, it's working with other people. And as you can see, there's a huge amount already underway for people and brands, retailers, and different organizations to get involved in. And again, then lastly, not forgetting to communicate. So communicating about what you're actually doing. So sharing your experience, sharing the learning, sharing it within the sector very specifically, but also then outside of the sector. So with consumers, for example, and other organizations that are interested. So I think with all of those different areas, and then with guidance like this, then it does help to move the industry to a more sustainable and then ultimately a more circular supply chain as well. Thank you. So I think Alejandro will try to do another quick summary, and then if there's time for any questions, we can do some questions as well.
El punto número 7 es más colaboración. Generando asociaciones estratégicas, como por ejemplo entre marcas y ONGs o varias marcas juntas, se pueden desarrollar estándares comunes para problemas clave y objetivos de la industria. Ria hace hincapié en que no es suficiente una colaboración, sino que es necesaria una integración. Pone, por ejemplo, una ONG que está colaborando con más de 30 marcas con el objetivo de evitar que se extraigan materias primas de los bosques protegidos. 8. Más transparencia. Las cadenas de suministro han sido hasta ahora invisibles. Cuanto más pública sea la información acerca de los proveedores, del origen de las materias primas, etc., mayores serán las posibilidades para prevenir o abordar problemas relacionados con el impacto medioambiental, la salud y la seguridad de los trabajadores, entre otros. 9. Más informes. Son necesarios más informes acerca de la sostenibilidad de las marcas e investigación en el sector para generar una línea de base, medidas estandarizadas y así lograr tener marcas cada vez más responsables y sostenibles. Muchos de estos rankings, medidores e informes provienen de ONGs o de asociaciones sin ánimo de lucro o empresas concienciadas con la sostenibilidad y promueven la transparencia de las empresas de la moda. Esto es un punto fundamental a la hora de lograr el cambio hacia la sostenibilidad. 10. Sostenibilidad social. Aproximadamente 60 millones de personas trabajan en la industria de la moda. Más del 50% de ellas no llega al salario mínimo. Entre los temas más importantes a tener en cuenta en el aspecto de la sostenibilidad social destacan los salarios ínfimos, las largas jornadas laborales, la libertad de asociación, la salud y la seguridad de los trabajadores, los derechos humanos, los derechos de la mujer, la explotación infantil y la esclavitud moderna. Todos ellos temas de vital importancia. Estos 10 puntos deben llevarse a la práctica en la medida de lo posible de forma conjunta, no aisladamente. ¿Cómo llevar estas ideas a la práctica? Gracias a la exposición, fruto del área de la información, cada vez hay un mayor número de consumidores concienciados de cambiar su comportamiento en relación al consumo de la moda. Sin embargo, no dejan de representar a un porcentaje muy pequeño de la población, ya que la gran mayoría aún no se preocupan por aspectos como la ética o la sostenibilidad a la hora de comprar. Desde el punto de vista de Ria, el cambio no pasa porque los consumidores demanden productos sostenibles, sino porque haya cada vez más iniciativas que ofrezcan recursos a las empresas, así como índices para medir la adherencia de estas a las medidas sostenibles, que de algún modo las fuercen o al menos las encaminen en esta dirección. Y aunque es cierto que algunos de los puntos que Ria propone requieren de una mayor inversión por parte de las empresas para poder implementarse de forma efectiva, otros son posibles con pequeñas inversiones. Y de hecho, son muchas las compañías que ya están comenzando a poner en práctica medidas sostenibles. Made by trabaja con muchas marcas en Europa y otros lugares, como G-Star, Tate Baker, Gap, Boss, H&M o Tommy Hilfiger, entre otras. La colaboración de Made by con todas estas grandes marcas demuestra que dar pasos hacia la sostenibilidad es ya una realidad.
Hola. Sí, ahora sí. Bueno, many thanks, Ria. Many thanks, Alejandra. Fantastic. All the information you have given to us.
It's a lot in a short space of time. I appreciate that. Yeah.
But it's very good to have so much, because
There's a lot. Yeah.
Thank you. So, bueno, pues que como habéis visto la ponencia fantástica, la cantidad de información que nos ha ofrecido Ria. Y bueno, pues ahora es el momento de las preguntas. Si tenéis alguna pregunta, podemos contar con Alejandra para traducirle sobre la cadena de suministro, alguna duda que os haya quedado, ¿nada?
I've confused everyone.
Okay.
I've overwhelmed them. That's okay.
I think everybody's trying to...
Of course, there's a lot. And I'm not sure if you share the presentations afterwards, but if people do want it, and there's a lot there that they can look through in terms of examples if they want to do a bit further sort of investigation in their own time.
Bueno, nos dice que puede... Ah, mira, tenemos una por allí. Mira a ver si se oye ahora, porque... como... ¿No?
Hi, Ria. Thank you very much for your very insightful presentation. I have suffered such a huge impact when I saw one of the slides you showed to us regarding that the textile fashion industry is the second largest contamination industry all over the world, but also you mentioned that in that same slide that it's the first one in consuming water that is very necessary in some continents as Africa or even in Asia. So could you tell us more about this?
Yeah, so I think, this stat is second largest user of water globally, and then, the second biggest polluter globally, only after the oil industry, in fact. And I suppose a huge amount of that I suppose the dependence on water is coming at the raw material stage. So when we look at the water that is required within cotton production, for example, the quantities are absolutely vast, which is why the industry needs to move away from, let's say, conventional cotton to more sustainable forms of cotton and other fibers as well that aren't so reliant on water. And that's why the recycled fibers are so critical. So we saw the stats from Recover earlier showing that actually they're not using water within their process. But you're right, it's a significant issue, and of course because the industry is so dependent on water, and yet actually, ironically, so many of the sourcing regions where we're sourcing and producing garments are actually already under water stress. So there's other big facts out there around the sort of the size of the populations already living in water stress and what's going to happen in these regions in terms of water scarcity in the future. So even if we just looked at it in that point, the fashion supply chain as it's set up currently is fundamentally unsustainable if we don't tackle issues like water and water management. Yeah, I don't know if that helps to answer.
Yes, thank you very much.
There's a lot of work I should add. The likes of WWF, so the World Wildlife Fund, they do a lot of work looking at water management and water basins within, I suppose, production regions, and they work alongside the likes of H&M on their water program. So you might find some interesting resources that they have specifically on water, if that's what you're interested in.
Bueno, le ha preguntado que se ha quedado impactada con una de las diapositivas en la que decía que la industria de la moda es la segunda más contaminante a nivel mundial, pero la primera que más agua consume. Y decía que eso es una preocupación, especialmente porque muchas de las prendas se fabrican en países que tienen escasez de agua. Y ella le ha contestado que este problema relacionado con la gran cantidad de agua que se utiliza está sobre todo en la fase de la producción de las materias primas. Por ejemplo, fabricar algodón requiere muchísima agua y por eso se necesita que la industria sea cada vez más circular y que tendamos a reciclar materiales y a utilizar otras materias primas que no consuman tanta agua para su fabricación, y dice que sí, que de hecho esto es un problema muy grave, que ya hay muchas asociaciones investigándolo porque no sería sostenible a largo plazo.
Okay. Hello.
Hi.
So we're part of an organization that actually is already working with recycled materials, and we're looking into creating a new department working in sustainability and innovation. So you mentioned the resources that you need, which could be huge because this is a huge subject to discuss. So I guess our question is, first of all, what would be like the first steps to take into looking into all the details of having like a transparent supply chain, for example, and how organizations like ours can actually approach Made By?
Okay, and can I just clarify where you said you were from? I missed that part, sorry.
I didn't say the name. We're part of EcoAlf.
Okay.
Okay, so we already work in sustainable fashion, but actually we are looking into creating like a department just for this. So I guess this is really interesting for us because it's like it could be huge, and actually we've been discussing internally recently, and it's question is resources.
And you mean specifically resources, sort of financial resources to get started and to make...
And team resources as well.
People as well.
People.
Okay. Yeah, I can understand the challenge in terms of resources. I think what I was trying to show within the presentation was that there's a lot actually out there that is sort of freely available, so for different organizations to access and at least start to build some knowledge. So it's not, I think, necessarily always a case of having to maybe work alongside very expensive consultants or with consultancies, or that actually there's quite a lot available out there already that can maybe help support organizations like yourselves that just want to get started. So Textile Exchange, for example, they release a lot of information. There is membership part to that organization that you have to pay for. But there is still a lot freely available as well. Certainly in terms of working with Made By, I mean, we work with many different brands, retailers and other organizations. So of course we always welcome to sort of to discuss, and meet with other people. And it may be that we don't work directly, but there'll be ways that we can connect organizations to other different people within the industry. In one hand, the industry is very large, and on the other hand is actually very small and is all very connected, and everyone knows everybody. And so if there's ways that we can support as Made By, then we'd be very happy to talk about that. I don't know if that helps to answer your question. Okay. We talk at lunch? Yes. Okay, sure.
Bueno, le ha preguntado dos cosas. Una era cuáles son los primeros pasos hacia la transparencia, como una pequeña empresa de sostenibilidad, que ella trabaja también en una empresa relacionada con el mundo de la moda sostenible, puede dar esos primeros pasos a la transparencia, y también cómo una organización como la suya, que no son una gran marca como muchas de las que colaboran con Made By, podría empezar a colaborar con ellos. Con respecto a la transparencia, no ha dado una respuesta. You want to answer?
I'll chat with her.
Okay. Y con respecto a la colaboración, le ha dicho que hay muchos recursos, como algunos de los que ha nombrado en sus diapositivas, que por cierto, si alguien las quiere, os las puede hacer llegar, y gratis, disponibles para todos, y si alguien quiere colaborar con ellos directamente también es posible. A lo mejor no una colaboración directa, pero siempre se puede hablar con ella, y dice que esto es un mundo muy pequeño en el que todos están relacionados, así que siempre sería posible intercambiar conocimiento.
Hi, Ria. My name is Rosanna. How are you? I have a question which I think I understood, and I'm sorry to make you explain this again.
That's
but
okay.
You were talking about reformation.
Yes.
You mentioned dead stock, that 15% of the materials that they use is dead stock. What exactly was dead stock?
So dead stock is it's surplus fabrics or materials. So that, let's say it's been not being used by another brand or retailer, and it's just left, and ultimately it would be wasted. So they call it dead stock. So they take that dead stock and then base their designs on that. And they do the same with vintage clothing as well, in quite limited quantities, but the dead stock they estimate is about 15% of their collection.
Is there a resource, like a website or something, where companies could use to find other companies that have dead stock that they could buy off of them, or how does that work?
That's a really good question. I don't know of one off the top of my head, but it is a very, very good question. And perhaps the likes of Reformation might, I'm not quite sure. They publish a lot on their website. They are very transparent. They don't publish exactly where they get the dead stock from. I know that they try to source as much as possible locally, so they're a US-based brand and they manufacture in Los Angeles. So it may be the likes of Reformation or using some sort of system like that. But I don't know, sorry, off the top of my head if there's one. But it's a very good question. If there's not one, then there should be one.
Yeah, okay, Thank you so much.
No problem.
Bueno, le ha dicho que qué quiere decir stock muerto, y le ha contestado que es casi como reciclar un material, solo que en vez de reciclarlo de los consumidores, después de que se ha fabricado ya una prenda y utilizas ese tejido, es material que en el proceso de esa fabricación no ha sido utilizado. Entonces, otra empresa pues, utiliza ese material que les ha sobrado, por decirlo de alguna manera, que habría sido desperdiciado de otra forma. Luego también le ha preguntado que si sabe alguna organización o alguna empresa en la que se pueda comprar directamente ese stock muerto, pero no ha sabido eso exactamente, pero lo va a encontrar.
I'll find out. Okay.
Hi, Ria.
Hi.
I wanted to ask you, when exactly do you know when Made By will release the new fiber ranking, and if it's going to include the unclassified fibers such as leather and the other one?
So we're hoping towards the end of this year. We get asked a lot about our benchmark. I think because it was released quite a few years ago, it's been updated twice. We actually think a lot of people in the industry are using it. So there's a lot of demand for it. So it is being reviewed currently. So I'm hoping towards the end of this year. And that, again, publicly available, so you'll be able to access that online. Yes, and then the intention is every fibre will be looked at, including the unclassified, and it will depend on what data is available. So if new LCA data is available, so it wouldn't have been available, which is why they were unclassified, it is now available and they can be assessed, then they would move into the main benchmark as well. So we'll look at every single fibre there and see what else can be brought in. Yeah. So hopefully it will be more comprehensive and of course more up to date.
Le ha preguntado que cuándo va a salir el New Fiber Ranking, que es como el ranking de nuevos materiales. Le ha contestado que esperan que hacia finales de este año.
A ver si, sí, ahora sí funciona. Bueno, pues many thanks, Ria, thank you very much.
Gracias.
Y gracias, Alejandra, por tu ayuda. Queda una pregunta. Bueno, pues no podemos desaprovechar la ocasión, o sea que perfecto que quede esa pregunta.
Hello.
Hi.
My name is Leire and I work for a synthetic fiber company here in Spain. We produce some fibers, we call it green fibers, and we are facing a problem now against certifications and against all the norms or standards that the big companies as Inditex, etc., are asking. And also regarding LCA, we face that there's no the same requirements from one company or another ones, and there's no real legal standard as an ISO, etc., available at least in Europe or in the States. Do you know when this kind of certification and standards are going to be equal for everybody? Or if there is an idea, or that in the Horizon 2020 some legislations will be settled.
Yeah, it's a very good question because I know I referenced certification and there's a positive role of certifications, but of course there's, I suppose, the flip side, and the negative is that actually with too many certifications and too many standards, it's actually it's confusing for people in the industry and it's confusing for consumers as well. So I completely appreciate that. And I think where the industry can start to align on certain standards and certifications, it's absolutely critical. So I think there is work being done on that. I don't know specifically in relation to ISO, but there is work being done within certain, I suppose, categories to try to standardize methodologies. So the SAC is doing work around kind of social convergence and looking at social auditing, for example, and Textile Exchange does a huge amount around its certification. So it might be a good resource to try, because they now own and manage actually quite a few, including the recycled standards as well, that might then relate to what you're doing within synthetics as well.
Yeah, because for the LCA standards, what we are facing is that there's no databases for all the whole chain, and they are using data that is really old-fashioned and is not the same for everybody.
Yeah.
And it's not the same in Europe and in Asia. So at the end, the final result is useless.
Yeah, I agree. It's very difficult, and there's sort of different methodologies around LCA. So again, it's not standardized, which doesn't support what you're trying to do. I guess if there is something there where you think, well, actually, it's credible, you know that LCA or that methodology is actually being used by multiple partners, they're credible, and you could actually say there's still merit in actually undergoing sort of the LCA process, and then at least you would have that there as sort of the industry evolves towards, let's say, more standardized methods. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I think you wouldn't be alone in sort of finding that challenging, and yeah, I know. I appreciate the challenge of that.
Thank you.
A ver.
No, es que no he seguido, Alejandra.
Bueno, pues
es que este es un tema como más
que,
complejo.
La verdad, lo siento mucho, pero esto era un tema muy técnico y me he perdido mucho. No conozco mucho vocabulario de la moda, del sector de la moda, y solo sé que ha empezado diciendo que trabaja en una compañía de material sintético, y luego ha empezado a hablar de índices, de que cada empresa, Zara, tal, cada una tiene sus propios índices y que echa de menos como un marco legal que los iguale, y lo que ella le ha contestado es que le entiende y le da la razón, pero que al mismo tiempo, por un lado, también hay demasiados estándares ya y que esto confunde a las empresas, no sé. Pensé que a lo mejor Gemma había entendido más la idea y nos podía ayudar, lo siento.
Yo es que no estaba siguiendo, perdona, pero bueno, es que esa es la realidad. En el tema de las certificaciones esa es la realidad, que hay demasiadas, no hay una unificación y al final terminamos todos confundidos y el primero el consumidor, efectivamente. Sí. Bueno, pues muchísimas gracias a las dos.
Gracias.